go ahead and consent. Consent by clicking your screen if you consent to continue recording. This is for the record and for accountability for the college. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Chris Caponelli. I am adjunct faculty here at the College for Certified Psychophysiologists. I am Charles Trembley's dissertation chair, and I want to take this opportunity to congratulate him on making it to this point. He's done a wonderful, wonderful job, and I have no doubt that tonight you will learn something, and you will, come away with knowledge that you had not had previously. Just a couple of things that I will ask of you going forward is when I turn it over to Charles, to go ahead and please shut off your video and mute your audio. Don't leave the meeting. This will enable Charles to go ahead and share his presentation without interruption. When he's done, he will stop sharing. I will go ahead and rejoin, and I will have some questions of my own. Other faculty and guests are welcome to the extent that we have time permitting to go ahead and submit their questions via the chat box. At the entire end of the presentation, I will ask everybody, including Charles, to depart the virtual meeting space. Myself and Dr. Perkins will discuss Charles's presentation, after which time he will be called back into the room to learn the results of his defense. So without further ado, I have made Charles the co-host. I am going to go ahead and mute my my audio, stop my video, and Charles, please take it away.
Hello, my name is Charles Trembley. I want to thank everybody for being here today. First, a little bit about myself before we get started. I'm 51 years old. I was born and raised in Orange County, California. Currently, I live in Menifee, California, which is in southeastern Riverside County. I am a future husband to Tiara, who's in here with us today, and father to Jessica, 28, who's with us as well, Juliet, 23, and Grant, 5. And also I have an 18-month-old granddaughter. I'm a retired police officer and currently a human performance specialist working with professional athletes in Southern California. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be able to further my education and follow my dreams of helping others achieve theirs. So with that, I think I'm supposed to share the screen now.
Yes, go ahead and please share your screen. You might have to go forward through a couple of slides to get to the actual presentation itself. So.
Okay, here we go.
And yeah, you can go ahead and full screen on that to the slideshow.
There we go.
Excellent, go ahead.
Okay, again, my name is Charles Trembley, and thank you all for being here. The title of my research is The Impact of Selective Cerebral Cooling on Post-Sparring Cognitive and Motor Function Impairments in Professional Boxers. Introduction. Professional boxers have the highest risk of neurologic injury among all athletes due to the cumulative effects of repetitive head impacts experienced in routine sparring. Although blows to the head in actual fights are more forceful, sparring accounts for the vast majority of head impacts experienced by boxers. According to estimates, neurologic injury occurs in approximately 2.9 out of every 10 professional boxing fights. And there are, on average, 13 deaths a year in the boxing world. When comparing boxing to football, one study found that only 17% of professional football players examined showed signs of axonal damage, compared to 80% of professional boxers. Many researchers now recognize chronic neuroinflammation as the primary cause of neurologic dysfunction associated with frequent repetitive head impact exposure. Cerebral injuries activate microglia cells, which have neuroprotective and neurotoxic effects in the brain. However, when chronic, hyperactive microglia cells produce pro-inflammatory cytokines, chemokines, free radicals, and neurotoxic molecules, which contribute to diffuse axonal injury, neuronal death, and focal brain atrophy. Cognitive and motor function impairments, as well as behavioral and mood alterations, are common in athletes suffering repetitive head impacts, as are the development of progressive neurodegenerative diseases resulting from career exposure to repetitive head impacts with or without a diagnosed traumatic brain injury. Conditions such as CTE, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, dementia, as well as deficits to memory, and executive function, anxiety, depression, impulsivity, and suicidality are all associated with frequent exposure to both concussive and subconcussive head impacts. And the degree of these dysfunctions and injuries are directly correlated to the total career exposure to repetitive head impacts. Selective cerebral cooling shows promise as a post-traumatic brain injury neuroprotective intervention. Researchers have shown that therapeutic hypothermia via focal head and neck cooling offers neuroprotective benefits post-injury. However, selective cerebral cooling has not been investigated in the professional boxing population as a neuroprotective strategy, with prior research being focused on selective cerebral cooling as a post-traumatic brain injury treatment option only. A problem statement. Several researchers conclude that frequent sparring poses significant risk of neurologic injury to professional boxers. It is estimated that a professional boxer will experience between 2,000 and 4,000 head impacts a year, the vast majority coming from routine sparring. While protective headgear is used, this does not protect against the rapid acceleration and deceleration of the head. Also, forceful blows cause rotational acceleration that are associated with tearing of blood vessels and axon damage. These are associated with progressive neurodegenerative disease like CTE. Therapeutic hypothermia has been found to offer neuroprotective benefits, but its invasive nature prevents it from being used as a preemptive measure. Several methods of therapeutic hypothermia exist. However, those that provide significant benefit require a clinical setting and are not able to be used in the field as a preventative measure. Researchers have shown that non-invasive selective cerebral cooling can provide the same neuroprotective benefits. However, it has not been previously investigated as a regular preemptive intervention in the boxing population. Currently, no neuroprotective interventions exist that are capable of or appropriate for regular use post-cerebral insult without a concussion diagnosis. Also, researchers have found that therapeutic hypothermia is only effective when applied within 90 minutes of the initial injury. After this time, there is no benefit. So on to the importance of the research. This study is the first known to investigate selective cerebral cooling to reduce the adverse consequences of frequent repetitive head impacts in professional boxers. Between 1.5 and 4 million sports-related traumatic brain injuries occur annually in the United States. Researchers estimate that 50% of concussions go undiagnosed, so this number is likely much higher. In 2010, an estimated $76 billion was spent treating these injuries. A 2009 study found that 90% of confirmed CTE cases were athletes, and 85% of these athletes were boxers. A note of interest, CTE was first discovered in the brains of deceased boxers in the 1920s and was previously referred to as punch drunk or dementia pugilistica, which is Latin for boxing dementia. So there's a long history between boxing and CTE. While much attention has been given to American football, the risk to boxers appears to be significantly higher. While football has implemented rules to prevent direct contact to the player's head, the goal in boxing remains to deliver as many forceful blows to the opponent's head as possible in an attempt to render them unconscious. Furthermore, researchers have found that 40% of athletes believe it is okay to withhold head injury symptoms from coaching and training staff and continue to practice or compete. Given the nature of boxing, the known risks, the likelihood of a traumatic brain injury going undiagnosed, and the short time window to initiate therapeutic hypothermia, it is essential for selective cerebral cooling to be investigated as a traumatic brain injury mitigation strategy. Our theoretical framework. This study's theoretical framework was based on the following concepts. Researchers have suggested that frequent repetitive head impact exposure poses a serious threat to the health and safety of professional boxers. Frequent exposure to repetitive head impacts experienced in routine sparring represent a significant threat via secondary injury mechanisms. The short intervals between sparring sessions do not allow adequate time for full neurologic recovery. Boxers typically spar 3 times a week. Neuroinflammation is the primary factor contributing to long-term neurologic consequences in contact sports athletes, and researchers have demonstrated a strong association between neuroinflammation and cognitive impairments. While fluid biomarkers of neuroinflammation exist, these require a sample of cerebral spinal fluid, something that was not appropriate for this study. Instead, I chose to use cognition as a potential indicator of neuroinflammation in the sample. Next, as previously mentioned, therapeutic hypothermia offers post-traumatic brain injury neuroprotective benefits. However, these interventions are invasive, require a clinical setting, have potential risks, and are not appropriate as a preemptive modality. The selective cerebral cooling device used in this study, the TECTROM protocol, has been given a non-significant risk rating by the FDA and has emergency approval as a breakthrough medical device. As far as an instrument to assess cognition and motor function, it is clear that the digital neuropsychological tests are effective at measuring cognition and motor function in individuals experiencing neural trauma and for evaluating the effectiveness of mitigation strategies. These tests are simple to administer and automatically grade the results, reducing the chance of human error. On to our research questions. Based on this framework, 2 research questions were developed. Does a single session of routine sparring result in cognitive and motor function impairments in professional boxers? Our null hypothesis is a single session of routine sparring does not result in significant impairments to cognition and motor function in professional boxers. With our alternative hypothesis being a single session of routine sparring results in significant impairment of motor and cognition function in professional boxers. Research question 2, does the implementation of selective cerebral cooling reduce the cognitive and motor function impairments resulting from repetitive head impacts sustained during routine sparring in professional boxers? Again, our null hypothesis is that the implementation of selective cerebral cooling does not significantly reduce cognitive and motor function impairments after routine sparring in professional boxers, while our alternative hypothesis is that the implementation of selective cerebral cooling significantly reduces cognitive and motor function impairments after routine sparring in professional boxers. On to our methodology and research design. Methods. This was a quantitative quasi-experimental study. I chose this method because quantitative quasi-experimental methods are most appropriate for identifying the effectiveness of an intervention in real-world settings. Given the nature of this study, research had to be conducted in the field at the boxer's place of training. I also employed a single subject design, as single subject design studies are valuable when the use of a control is not possible and for studying small groups difficult to recruit, such as elite athletes. Access to professional boxers actively training for fights is extremely limited, making the use of a control group nearly impossible. Thus, the single subject design was necessary. Our instrument. The data collection instrument used in this study was the Cambridge Neuropsychological Automated Test Battery, which is a digital assessment tool particularly suited for detecting mild cognitive impairments. The CAN-TAB has been featured in over 2,000 clinical studies over the past 30 years and was developed by the University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom and is FDA approved. I purchased the license from Cambridge Cognition to use the CAN-TAB in this study. 4 tests were chosen from the 28 available on the CAN-TAB. These were selected based on those used in prior research and the recommendations of Cambridge Cognition. First, the multitasking test, or MTT, is an 8-minute test of the participant's ability to manage conflicting information provided by a direction of an arrow and a location on the screen, and to ignore task-irrelevant information. Second, the Paired Associates Learning Test, or PAL, is an 8-minute test that assesses visual memory and new learning. Next was the Reaction Time Test, or RTI. This is a 3-minute test of reaction time that assesses motor and mental response speeds, movement time, reaction time, response accuracy, and impulsivity. By the way, I did not do well in that one. And lastly, the Spatial Working Memory, or SWM test. This test is a 4-minute test that requires retention and manipulation of visual information. This self-ordered test has notable executive function demands and provides a measure of strategy and working memory. On to our population. This study's sample came from a population of actively training professional boxers in the state of California. G-Power indicated that a sample size of 317 of the estimated 1,800 boxers in the state of California was needed to achieve a 95% confidence level with a 5% error margin. While this study did not meet the G-power sample size, the data is still significant because of the single subject design. For this study, 16 male professional boxers were recruited with an average age of 25.25 years. 14 of these boxers completed all 3 assessments. 1 completed only assessment 1 and 2, and 1 completed only assessment 1. All subjects completed a questionnaire stating that they had no recent head or neck injuries and have not been diagnosed with a psychiatric disorder. Data collection. All data was collected through the CanTab digital application, with assessments being completed on touchscreen iPads in a quiet place free of distractions. Data was collected in 3 phases. Phase 1, or pre-exposure. This data was collected on Monday mornings after a minimum of 48 hours without training. This is considered resting baseline. Phase 2, post-exposure, where data was collected 45 minutes after the completion of training, which included routine sparring and exposure to repetitive head impacts. Phase 3, post-intervention. This data was collected 45 minutes after the completion of training, which included routine sparring and exposure to repetitive head impacts, and after completing a 30-minute selective cerebral cooling treatment. So to be clear, the 30-minute cooling session took place during the 45-minute waiting period before the assessment. Data analysis and statistical measures. This study's data was inputted into SPSS and analyzed using 4 linear mixed models, unconstructed covariance matrix for residuals, a post hoc comparison of sessions, and Hochberg's step-up method. These methods were chosen in part to alleviate the challenge of a small sample size, also to maximize the benefits of single subject design using 4 distinct tests of cognition and motor function. The Hochberg step-up method was used as it's valuable when analyzing multiple tests of significance, as was the case in this study. For each of the 4 CanTab tests were individually looked at. However, with the step-up method, unadjusted p-values are ordered from largest to smallest, potentially increasing the reliability of the findings. On to our findings. This study produced some unexpected results. For research question 1, does a single session of routine sparring result in cognitive and motor function impairments in professional boxers? The null hypothesis was retained for all 4 tests. A single session of routine sparring did not significantly impair cognition or motor function as seen in prior research. A small effect was observed post-sparring for the MTT and SWM test, but these did not meet the threshold for significance. As for research question 2, does the implementation of selective cerebral cooling reduce cognitive and motor function impairments resulting from repetitive head impacts sustained during routine sparring in professional boxers? The null hypothesis was retained for the PAL and RTI test. However, it was rejected for the MTT and SWM test. Again, we had a surprising outcome here. The implementation of selective cerebral cooling did not significantly improve performance when compared to the post-exposure measures, the measures between assessment 2 and assessment 3. However, selective cerebral cooling did improve performance on the MTT and SWM test when compared to baseline pre-exposure performance. So what does this mean? Considering that several researchers have shown that boxers in general have cognitive deficits compared to non-contact sports athletes, these findings indicate that selective cerebral cooling may reduce neurologic impairments to executive function resulting from the cumulative effects of repetitive head impact exposure over the professional boxer's career. However, certainly more research is needed to establish this point. On to our tables. Table 1 shows the fixed effects for the MTT. We can see that there was a stronger effect between session 1 and session 3 compared to session 1 and 2 or 2 and 3. Table 2, we see the pairwise comparisons between all sessions. Again, establishing that only comparison to rise to the level of significance was session 1 and session 3. Here we see the fixed effects for the SWM And again, we only see significance between session 1 and session 3. And table 4, again, the pairwise comparison for the SWM, showing that the only significant comparison occurred between session 1 and session 3. No tables were created for the PAL or RTI test, as the data was not significant. Our findings and limitations. First, a convenience sample comprised of professional boxers training in Riverside, California, previously known to the researcher. Again, access to these athletes is extremely limited. I was only able to conduct this study because I work with these athletes regularly and have earned their trust. Next, a small sample size compared to the total number of professional boxers in the state of California. However, we address this with the single subject design. Next, the inability to control the total repetitive head impact exposure for each participant. I was not able to interfere with the boxer's training in any way. So each subject had different repetitive head impact exposure throughout the research. However, this should only be a problem if I was comparing the experimental group to controls. And next, the possibility of bias, as the researcher is employed by the participants as a human performance specialist. I do assert that I did not display any bias in this study and actually never looked at the assessment results until all assessments were completed. So I did not want to have any predisposed ideas concerning the intervention's impact. Our summary conclusions. The researcher concludes that selective cerebral cooling offers promise as an intervention for reducing neurologic impairments to executive function, resulting from the cumulative effects of repetitive head impact exposure in professional boxers. Summary: sports-related neurotrauma is a serious issue, particularly in the boxing world. Routine sparring represents the most significant threat due to the volume of head impacts and short intervals between exposures. No preventative neuroprotective interventions are currently in use. This study did not see acute cognitive or motor function impairments post-sparring. However, executive function performance improved post-selective cerebral cooling compared to baseline. It's my recommendation that more research is needed to establish the benefits of post-sparring selective cerebral cooling treatment. An investigation employing a larger sample and evaluating fluid biomarkers of neuroinflammation is necessary to fully understand selective cerebral cooling's potential to reduce the harmful effects of frequent repetitive head impact exposure to professional boxers. That will conclude my presentation. I want to thank everybody for your time and attention.
Charles, well done. Thank you. If you can go ahead and stop the slideshow presentation at this time. I would like to congratulate you on a job well done. I really never had any doubt that you would be able to do that. I just have a question regarding applications of this technology beyond boxing, which I know you concentrated on. If I remember correctly, this was studied at Akron's Children's Hospital, the Tectron protocol, with a particular focus on young soccer players who have repetitive impacts with soccer balls in the proverbial maneuver called heading, and they're starting to find that this repetitive, hitting the ball with your head has long-term implications. Why do you think that this has not been adopted in professional or amateur sports as a regular protocol? I mean, certainly now they have to know that repetitive injury over many years. I mean, the scandal of American football and CTE, you'd think that they would now be making making players submit to this protocol. What do you envision happening with that?
Well, the technology is novel, and this is the first company to bring this to market. The FDA gave it an emergency approval, I heard, as of July, and by the end of the year should have full approval. So we would expect that it would take off like a rocket. It'd almost be compulsory that if something out there has been shown to reduce the long-term effects of the sport, that every team would have to use it.
Good point. Good point. I don't have any other questions. I'll just go around the horn here. Dr. Perkins, anything that questions that you have?
Sure. I have a couple of questions. The first, due to the actual device itself, what is the retail cost of this particular device?
Currently, because it's not mass produced yet, they say one unit costs them about $6,000.
Okay. My second question is, when this device is applied, what percentage in changing the actual cerebral temperature, so versus the sort of the temperature that the normal temperature of the brain versus what the temperature of the brain is post sparring, what does it bring it down to?
Sure. So it's extremely difficult to measure the temperature of the cerebral environment, but in research they find out between 1 and 3 degrees. And so we understand that the brain temperature is typically 1 to 3 degrees higher than body temperature.
Right.
So this device, if it can reduce it by 1 to 3 degrees, that's actually a fairly large margin.
And what is the time parameter between that is available to you to be able to reap the benefits of this post the exposure to trauma to the head?
Sure. Research has shown that there's a 90-minute window to initiate a cooling intervention, and that after that 90-minute window, there is really no benefit.
Because, I see this device, I see its application in professional sports, absolutely. But I also recognize that, a traumatic brain injury is the #1 cause of death in adults under 45 years old. It's the #2 cause of death of adults over 65. So, I mean, if more research and more data was distributed about this, you take a person that was in, say, a motor vehicle accident. If this was a device that was able to be administered by paramedics within that window of time on the way to the hospital, I really wonder, like, how valuable could this be in reducing that death factor of what the #1 cause of death in adults under 45 years of age is. I think your study is fascinating. Fascinating.
I think that this will be on every ambulance, every medical clinic, every sports team. I think how could it not be? In fact, I wish I could get stuck in it.
That's all the questions that I have. If anyone else.
Dr. Maxwell, anything from you?
I think this is just amazing. Like, I have a 16-year-old son who is, on one hand, was almost, I hate to say happy about COVID, but he's in that age. He's huge. He is prime for football, loves football, been all about football since he was like 11 months old and spiraling his little football around the house. And he, I made him watch the concussion movie, when it came out, and he did switch over to basketball and stuff, but he's still, football is it, and like, as you said, I mean, there's just no way to really, I mean, you can say all you like, hey, don't do this is going to cause this, but hey, that we still get in our cars and speed all the time, and it could cause a crash. We're going to do things, and our kids are going to do things, and we're going to think we're invincible, and we're really not. So we need as many things to counter our own recklessness and our state of self, that we really believe that it's not going to happen to us. And clearly, and as you've cited, it is going to happen if we are going to be in those positions. And just like Dr. Perkins said, I mean, if this can help in sports, and every school has it, I mean, how many countless kids have actually even died on the field at very young ages, and they'll say, oh, it was this or that. I don't believe that. I mean, these kids they're playing for their lives, and they're playing to impress every single day. They are out there knocking themselves senseless. So if that's the case in boxing, yeah, I mean, I'm just one of those people. I shake my head all the time at the fact that everything is just hypocrisy. It's like, oh, you know, with football and boxing is really, come on, like that's crazy. And it's very good that you're out there really looking out for people that clearly are going to need it, because they did not put enough money into this at all. So you're there to pick up the slack. And even if it is, it's late. I mean, they should have been doing something, but they didn't have you. So now we do, and that's awesome. Congratulations.
I'd like to make a quick statement on something related to that. So we have a 5-year-old son, and I work with many of the top boxers in the world, and he'll come to the gym with me. He watches the fights and he wants to be a boxer, which is something I will never be okay with. Even though I work in the boxing world and I see these guys, a lot of these guys, you know, you saw the average age is 25 of these guys I work with, and you know, they're like sons to me as well. And so I had a little, when, you know, as I started doing this study, I had a little bit of a moral dilemma. You know, how can I see the absolute incredible danger these guys are in and continue to work with them and help them to get better so they have longer careers and maybe take more damage? But then what I thought was, I can only change it from the inside. I can only, you know, do something about it from the inside, because I have the connections in the boxing world. I have the connections with all the promoters and the athletic commissioners. And now I have, you know, hopefully here soon I'll have the degree that, you know, makes my opinion a little stronger. And this research, hopefully we can use it to make some actual meaningful changes in the combat sports world.
That's amazing.
Dr. Patrick, do you have anything to add, or to any questions?
Yes, you know, first of all, I loved your program. I thought that we talked so much about football injuries that it's about time we really tailored it to a sport. And you started out with this, which I love, that is focused on knocking out your opponent. I mean, what a way to distinguish the significance of this research from so many other things we hear about concussions that are, you know, that obviously are big threats in other sports, but boy, not like this, where this is actually the goal. And I love the football analogy, because we all know what the goal is of football, you know, is to get touchdowns, get that, you know, get across the finish line. But here in boxing, the goal is to hit someone hard enough with as much force to cause them to lose consciousness. I love that. And I love what Dr. Maxwell said about, you know, having a 16-year-old and being painfully aware of how important sports are to that age range, and how this will be such a benefit. I also love the proactivity of this approach. Anything that's creative, that, you know, really starts with having a look not only of the significance of the niche, but then of the research on top of all of that. And I love what you just said in that short statement you made, having the credentials to move the ball forward. Since we've been talking about football, I think it's just paramount. So I thought you did a great job. It was a pleasure to watch and to listen.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Dr. Vincent?
Yes, I second everything that all the previous statements that have been made. And I want to add, when you were talking about Children's Hospital, immediately I thought of what Dr. Perkins had mentioned about you know, more vehicle collisions and things like that. I didn't even think of the sports. And so where I go from this, whether it's sports or an injury of any kind, I think your study is really going to support the cognitive richness that people will be able to maintain and not lose as a result of the injury that they've sustained. So I think this is brilliant, and I'm really excited. I'm really hoping that once you obtain this doctoral degree, that you're going to continue maybe further this study a little further, right? I think that I think it and like you say, use those credentials to make sure that this selective cooling, cerebral cooling devices is in, like you say, every ambulance, every school, every hospital, every, who knows where they can be. But thank you so much. It's been a fantastic presentation, Charles.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. At this point, I just want to make a brief statement regarding Charles's work. Charles, you beat even me to the finish line. I told you I did mine in 15 months. I think you barely got through 13. And your dissertation, and you know how rigorous I've been. You hit every benchmark. You did. I mean, despite incredible pressures, work-wise, personally, with family, you got the job done. And I don't think I could have asked for anything more from a candidate than I got from you. Some people take months, some people take years. To say that you got it done in just about 13 months, it was a phenomenal, phenomenal achievement. I do always like to take the opportunity to recognize family who's in on the call, your fiance, Tiara, and to your daughter, Jessica. This doesn't happen in a vacuum. This doesn't happen without you. I spent 5.5 years in graduate school between my master's and my doctorate. Without the support of my family, I would not have made it to where I am now. So I want you to know that I'm sure Charles appreciates, but we appreciate as an academic community, your commitment to Charles over these last X number of years in helping him achieve his dream, and now giving him to us, to the larger academic community, to contribute something to the larger body of knowledge. So to both of you, I say thank you very, very much, and I offer my sincere appreciation. Dr. Perkins, anything else from you?
No, I reiterate, the work that Charles has done. He set a standard for himself from day one, and his attention to detail, his ability to be flexible in dimensions of things that perhaps you didn't have a whole lot of. There are some elements of the work which he did come to the table having an understanding, and there were new elements. And when you have an extremely high standard for yourself, and all of a sudden you're getting a sort of new element of strength, that can throw a person off, and that never happened with Charles. And so I commend you. I also commend the support that would have been required, that was given from his family members, and he's to be commended.
Thank you, Dr. Perkins. Appreciate it.
Charles, is there anything else that you'd like to add before we go to deliberations?
I'll publicly thank Tiara. There's no way I could have possibly done this without her. I'm only have this standard for myself because I'm trying to keep up with her. And my daughter, Jessica, who is so amazing and is always there for me. And she's the one I can call and talk to when anything's going bad. And, she's always there for me. So I love you both.
Well said, Charles. Thank you. Okay, at this point in time, I am going to stop recording the presentation. Stop record. Okay.